Okay. Welcome to our celebration of the Dylan Minor project that we have currently on at the Dunlop Art Gallery. So I'm just going to read my notes so I don't make a mistake. So, on behalf of Dunlop Art Gallery and the MacKenzie Art Gallery, I would like to welcome you to our Iteration of Culture Days 2016, a panel presentation of the Dylan Minor Native Kids Ride Bikes collaborative project. My name is Wendy Peart, and I'm the Curator of Education and Community Outreach at the Dunlop Art Gallery. And my colleague Nicole Nugent is here with us as well from the MacKenzie Art Gallery, who I worked with planning this project for a couple of years already. Dylan Minor is an artist from Michigan. He was here a couple of years ago as a part of a kind of a performative event with David Garneau's performance, and he gave a talk at the university and he introduced me to his project, and I thought, oh wow, we have to do that here. So when talking to Nicole about it, she jumped right on board, and we worked together to make this all happen. One of the biggest roles that we have, Nicole and I, in the community is being that link that puts artists in with the communities, knowing the right artists, knowing the right communities that you need to serve. That's a big aspect to our job, and I think we did a really great job on this project working with our artists who are here today and the communities that we worked with. So with our panel, we have 3 of the 4 artists that we worked with. We have Keith, Burt, Eagleclaw Thom, and Stacey Fayant. And we don't have Katherine Boyer because she's working on her master's in Winnipeg. So good luck, Katherine, out there. Glad to have had you before you left. We are extremely grateful to our funders for this project, and as well as all of our other projects. The Canada Council for the Arts, the Saskatchewan Arts Board, SAS Culture, SAS Lotteries, and Canadian Heritage. We would also like to give a big shout out to Dutch Cycle, the bike store in town. They were really helpful for us, for all the missing pieces, and for providing us with things that we needed at the last minute. They were really great. So now I'm just going to let Nicole say a few words, and then we're going to pass on the mic to our artists.
Thank you, Wendy. I would just like to say a special thank you to Wendy for being such a great partner to work with, and this project really couldn't have happened without both institutions really committed to community engagement and the work that we've been able to do in this project. And of course, I'd like to thank the artists who, as well, this project couldn't have happened without you, and your enthusiasm and passion for community engaged practice is really inspiring, and it's been such an honor to work with all of you. This panel doesn't necessarily close off the life of these bikes, and I wanted to just mention a couple of community activations that happened. We were at the Folk Festival with Stacey this summer, and we were able to share the bikes with the community at the Folk Festival. And we also talked about this project in our Dylan Minor engagement space at the MacKenzie Art Gallery this summer. And now, after the bikes are done being displayed here at the Dunlop, we also have 3 other partners who are tentatively lined up to share the bikes in the community this winter. So keep your eyes peeled for the bikes popping up at places like potentially the Sports Hall of Fame, the Civic Museum, and the RCMP Heritage Center. So we're just working that out right now, but we're really excited to be able to continue the life of these bikes in the community. Once the bikes are done being displayed this winter, Dylan's goal the plan is to give the bikes back to the communities in which they were created. So they'll be returned to the schools and the community organizations where they were made. And that's all I have to say.
I'm just going to do the intro on Dylan. So if you can scroll to the next
thing. Okay, so I'm just going to give a bit of background on Dylan Minor. Dylan A.T. Minor is a Métis artist, activist, and scholar. He is currently Director of American Indian and Indigenous Studies and Associate Professor in the Residential College in the Arts and Humanities at Michigan State University. Minor is also Adjunct Curator of Indigenous Art at the MSU Museum and a founding member of Just Seeds Artist Collective. He holds a PhD from the University of New Mexico and has published approximately 60 journal articles, book chapters, critical essays, and encyclopedia entries. This goes on. Okay. In 2010, he was awarded an Artist Leadership Fellowship through the National Museum of American Indian. And he's been featured in more than 20 solo exhibitions and many more planned in the future. So we're going to just click on a link. We're going to go to a video. Oh, that's interesting. Why isn't it doing? That worked before. Can you try again, Nicole? See what happens. See, it's just, okay, technology. Maybe we won't do that. So you can go on YouTube and look up Dylan Miner. Yeah. Oh,
He's
that's
also
too
giving
bad.
a great interview in the space upstairs.
Pardon me?
He's also
Oh, yeah, he's featured in the video upstairs, so you'll get a chance to hear him speak. That's just fine. Okay, that's all good. So we are going to move on to having the artists talk about their process, their project, give a few inside details about what it was like to work in the community and with Dylan and whatnot. So I'm not sure what order we're going in. I'm just going to... Keith Burt.
Hi, my name is Keith Burt. I am Indigenous to Saskatchewan, Central Saskatchewan, Gordon's Indian Reservation, and Cody First Nation. And I did my undergrad and my MFA at the University of Regina. The work that I do is Indigenous spirituality and cross-referencing it with other spiritual entities within other cultures, and to see how they parallel with each other and what they do and the morality that is taught within this. And I had the opportunity to do this project with Dylan and my fellow artists and the people who are sponsoring it. It was actually quite interesting. I find the technology and the technological culture that it has arisen in the past 50 years is kind of detrimental to other cultures per se, because it takes quite a bit of interest away from from the culture itself, being an interjected culture. I found that kids that I worked with, their attention spans seem to tend to lean towards technology and the games that it presented, and the interest of traditional technology and or traditional teachings and spiritual teachings seem to have taken a back seat within the urban areas. I had the opportunity to be on the reservations and in places where ceremonies have been performed. It seems to be full on there. Technology is not allowed in any of these spaces. So the culture is pretty strong in some pockets, but it is reaching out. This is where my work comes in. I'd like to try and interject some of this interest within the urban sector to our children through the arts and projects like this, hands-on projects. There was only two. I ended up with only two of the students. The dropout rate was pretty high from day one. So, but I did like working with our children. I do it mostly as much as I can, where I can. It seems it doesn't matter where you go with children, so I have quite a bit of fun with it, and to be able to work with it within any institution is actually pretty interesting. And I like the rules and regulations that go with working with these institutions because it's teaching ethically also to the children. I'd like to thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Eagleclaw Thom. I have First Nations U and BAD, Bachelor of Education Actually degree, where I specialize with working with little kids. I love kids. I love bikes. I cycle all the time. I started getting really nerdy about bikes. Like when I had no other transportation. So I like building bikes. I like making things pretty also as an artist. So this, when I got asked about, now like 2 years ago, to be part of this, it was recently after Dylan Miner gave his talk, and I was photographing and doing video for David for his performance. And I was just so like enthralled with Dylan's presence and his intelligence that I was like, yeah, definitely. I definitely want to work on that, just to get to know the guy better and to get to know the process and to work with some more experienced artists. It was really interesting. I wish you guys got to see the video because Dylan's very smart, very interested in bridging the gap between traditional practices and the urbanization that we currently are living in. For me, I grew up as an urban First Nations person. I've never really lived on reserve. I went to ceremonies and stuff. My art practice currently focuses around modern hide painting. So for me, I use a lot of spray paints and silk screening, photosensitive dyes and stuff like that as a way to create new representations on hide. So it seemed like a very easy gap to bridge for me in the working with the kids and introducing them to technologies that, while they may seem new, aren't necessarily that new, and throwback to ways of people have been doing things for thousands of years. The working with the kids was great. It was, I found working in the school setting, even though with a teaching degree myself, I'm not a big fan of school settings because, unlike Keith, because of the structure for me, it kind of drives me crazy. So being in school settings, I don't feel the kids have enough freedom to just do and be and learn as they need to. Although the teacher I was working with was kind of amazing. And he was very welcoming of the different learning styles of the children. And the freedom that is needed to go along with that. So I was really grateful for where I was placed. At first we tried to involve all the kids, but not all the kids are always involved in things. And it's really hard to work with 20 kids, 20-some kids on a single bike that's like 6 foot in diameter. You know, there's only so much you can do with that. So we ended up breaking into groups, doing other things, talking about art in various ways, technology, what they're interested in, music, and how we could turn that into the bike, put those interests into the bike. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. It was an amazing project, and I'm super grateful to everybody involved. I thought it was amazing.
Hi, I'm Stacey Fayant. I was also really honored and happy to be asked to do the project. And I think the biggest thing that had an impact on me and that I really loved about the project was the idea of visiting that went along with it. That was really integral to what Dylan was talking about and what he wanted to happen. So The things that touched me were the little intimate times I had with certain kids in my group, and intimate stories they'd tell me about themselves. They would look for an opportunity when maybe everybody else had left, and they would come and talk to me and tell me something that was very private and very intimate. So obviously I'm not going to share those stories, but as a part of that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, kind of in the same vein as what they were doing. I'm a felter and a milliner, and I have my degree in painting and printmaking. So I generally do whatever kind of art is necessary for what I'm trying to express. I'm going to tell you, though, about my identity a little bit. On my mom's side, right there, I'm French-Canadian, and it's very, very simple. On my dad's side, it's a lot more complicated. So it's this paternal side that features prominently in the story I'm going to tell you today. My father raised us Métis because he was Métis. His dad was Métis. His dad was a trapper in the valley near LeBret. My grandfather's Métis roots were proud and deep, coming from the Batoche area and being involved in that particular defining moment at Batoche, the rebellion. You can go to Batoche and see my family's plot of land on the maps enshrined there, which show the area prior to the rebellion. I was raised to be quite proud of my Métis heritage. On my father's maternal side, though, my grandmother, Doris, was Treaty Indian. She lost her status upon marrying my Métis grandfather and had to move off the reserve. And I think my father always felt that her family that had retained their treaty status looked down upon their statistically Métis cousins. He passed on to me this feeling of not belonging that has stuck with me to this day. He was always proud to be Métis, but the Métis sense of nationality and of belonging together, a community, has always been very self-thought. I would say, and in that we were never part of those recognized nations that took part in the treaty, so the Canadians and First Nations people. We were an extra group. Many of you are aware, though, that this has changed recently with the law, so that's great. But anyway, I always felt a yearning for that identity card, that treaty card. A few years ago, I started the process of applying for that card, and after a lot of drawn-out correspondence with the government, I got my card. And some may be wondering, did my dad ever apply for that card? He didn't, because he was very, very proud to be Métis, and he felt that those were the people that accepted him. He wasn't angry that I got my status, but he wasn't happy either. It was one of the few times where I spoke to my dad and he didn't seem happy about something I did. But the story is more complicated still. My Métis grandfather passed away when my father was a little boy, and as a result, my grandmother remarried a treaty man, and so gained status prior to the change in the equity law through that marriage. When I was granted my treaty status, the government placed me not with my grandmother's original band, Muscatpeting, but with the last band she belonged to, my step-grandfather's band, Pepecasis. And so when I finally was granted that card, that identity that I thought was me, it still wasn't the traditional identity that I thought it was going to be. And so I was still confused and still felt that sense of not belonging and of not being something specific. So obviously that card is not my identity. What is my identity is the story I just told you. It's the people around me. And you'll often hear Aboriginal people, when they introduce themselves, they say, I'm from this place, these are my people. It's that identifying thing. And I've always felt that since mine is so complicated, how do I express that without getting into a huge long story like I just told you? But it was those kind of stories that the children told to me and expressed to me, and we connected and made that community with each other. And those are the things that I felt are really hard fought for all Aboriginal people, because of the way legislation has forced us to identify in certain ways. So a lot of us can understand the abuses and the violence inflicted on people in the residential schools. Those things are very easy to understand. But the violence of losing your sense of identity and community is another thing that touches our generation, older generations, and the younger generation. And so that's kind of what I got out of this whole program.
Okay.
Thank you all. So we have a couple of questions now. I'm just trying to think of what the best one is. I'm going to start with one of my favorites. So throughout this project, and you spent about 6 weeks in the communities, give or take, and most of the time twice a week, sometimes once a week. What is, and getting to know the participants in the program, what's the one moment in this project that you will always remember, and why?
I'll go first because I'm closest to you. The one moment I remember is the first day. We had an elder come in, we had pizza, we made a big thing of it, there was a lot of kids there, and this little girl kind of peeked her head around while we were during the thick of it, right? There was like 20 kids there, and we were all eating pizza and laughing and everything, and I gestured for her to come in, and she went away, and I was like, oh, that's too bad, I lost that one. But then everybody left, and she came back and spent probably at least a half an hour with me, telling me about herself and about her family, and we drew bikes together and stuff like that, and I was really happy she came back.
I think for me, it would be seeing the kids ride the bike, because I only had one at school for the first time. It's not an easy bike to ride, just throwing that out there. It's actually incredibly difficult. The angles and geometry of it are really strange, and when you hop on it, you're like, oh yeah, I know how to ride a bike, and then you're like, I don't know how to ride a bike. And all the kids felt the same, but they were so into it, and it felt like watching people learn how to ride bikes all over again. So you get to experience that moment with them, like as you, as Nate was running and holding the bike for one of the kids, I was just watching and I'm like, wow, it's just like, this kid's never been on a bike before and he's just trying to get it for the first time ever, and just watching that and seeing the excitement in their face and mixed with like a little tiny bit of unsureness and fear. I loved that. I thought it was amazing.
With me, it was the first day. We actually didn't get any work done because I just let them take the bike out of the box and let them go over all the parts, where they went. And I let them figure out what went where with the bikes and stuff like that. But I just let them talk amongst themselves and allow them to get familiarized with the parts and the bike itself. And then we just spoke while they were doing that. Then we'd speak. We speak about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and the things they wanted to do with it. And we all went home, we had lunch, and we all went home. And that was actually the most interesting day I've had with them. After that, it was all pretty well technical, putting it together and speaking with them. But it was quite fun doing that.
Well, that's good. I'm just going to say one story, though. This would come from Catherine's group when I was there at the very end. And same kind of, we had a bike riding session. And even the bike wasn't fully tweaked, so the seat was all over the place and kids were falling. And this one guy got on the bike and he took it to like, what's that saying? You know, he just took to it. And he got on that thing, and the next thing you know, he is gone across the field. And we're like, whoa, is he coming back? Oh, let's hope he comes back. He came back, but then he did it again. So he just like, it was his thing. He just knew how to do it instinctually. The others tried, they couldn't do it, but this guy could. So it was kind of cool. That would probably be one of the highlights for me. So maybe I'll just ask another question. I'm gonna flick the switch a little bit. As an artist, how important do you think community art practice is in your work? I think a lot of you have already spoken to that, but maybe you just want to highlight it and pass it along, or it's not. I mean, it's a question. Is it important to your work? And if so, why? And if not, what are the drawbacks?
I see an importance through community work, but within our culture, we can't push any traditional or spiritual teachings onto anyone. They have to come forward with it. But I present an aspect of it to draw an interest to the idea of culture and spiritual, Indigenous spirituality.
This is one that I think about a lot. I feel that as artists, we have a responsibility, because our main job is storytelling, right? We do visual storytelling or audio storytelling, or however, whatever your practice is. You're trying to convey an emotion, a feeling, a story of some sort, something. And a lot of the times that gets, we're egotistical. Just throwing that out there. Artists are egotistical and narcissistic. We think about ourselves often more than anybody else. So I think it's, for me, it's very, very, very important to try to not fall into that narcissism and egotism. So with the work I do, I like to try to incorporate community as much as I can, whether it be gathering other people's stories and then trying to translate that into a visual medium of some sort, or figure out ways for people to tell their own stories, or however. So it just feels like an obligation to work with communities rather than solo by myself in a studio all the time.
A lot of my work, most of my work, like I said, it's about identity. It's about trauma specifically. And it's always been about learning things myself, teaching myself and growing, and perhaps doing something that Métis people did in the past, but I don't know anybody who does it now, so I'm going to learn how to do it. And I've never really thought of myself as old enough to extend that and start to pass it on. I've always felt like I'm 15. And so I think this project kind of really has changed that for me and lit that up for me, that I do have enough knowledge now that can change in my practice and in what my goals are, spreading the stuff that I've taught myself and that I've kind of learned on my own. So
That's great.
Can we do one more question? And then we're going to ask you guys if you guys have any questions. Okay?
Well, I was going to ask you what you learned, but you just answered that question, Stacey. Eagle and Keith, do you have anything you want to add in terms of what you've learned through this project? This was a really interesting format in terms of working with an artist who doesn't live here and having a really dense experience with someone, and then having them leave, and you're here left to do the work and have these relationships and grow these relationships in the community. And I'm just wondering, throughout that process, what did you learn? Do you think that were there any missed opportunities or challenges with that? You know, from an institutional perspective, around when we think about how we engage communities, Wendy and I still have a lot to learn about the frameworks that we work with, and so I thought that this one was a new one for me for sure, and I'd like to just get a sense of what you learned.
Actually, teaching Indigenous culture and spirituality, like I said before, it's people have to ask if they want to learn anything like this, and that's the only way that people can open up to it. So the small steps that you can take through the arts is something that is constantly being learned by Indigenous artists to be able to do these things. And as Eagle pointed out about ego and stuff like that, in our traditional teachings, once you have a child, there is no ego, there's nothing like that, because you become last, and the child becomes first. And with these teachings to the children, that's what I tried to bring forth as the children first, what they wanted to know. So our topic often strayed in different directions, but that was good because the whole thing was running. But we always came back to the idea of the spirituality, the idea of what we were doing, why we were doing it, and the teachings around the horse mask itself. So it was pretty interesting.
For me, I think a big thing I learned, and I relearn this every single time I work with large groups of students, younger students, is patience, and a willingness to accept diversion and a way to draw them back into it. That's a huge one for me when working with kids. That's usually always the first lesson that I'm like, I get really frustrated about it at first, and then I'm like, oh yes, gotta be patient, blah, 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 wait for these guys to get interested. Either that or be the life of the party and make them interested in something. I try to do both. Another thing I learned, oh geez. That just because somebody's acting one way doesn't mean they're going to continually act that way. There was a couple of students who were difficult at first who, by the end of the project, came around and were the most helpful and most involved in the project, and had the most to add. But at the same time, that ties into patience thing. So.
Should we open it up to the floor? Let's do it. Yeah. Okay, so what else do you guys want to know? Any other questions? Anthony, yes.
I guess I'm wondering, question for the artists, like during the course of the project, did the focus change? I mean, you talked about this a little bit, but when you started, was the project kind of like, oh, we're going to build a bike? And then as things went along, there were all kinds of other conversations, I'm sure, and did the kids' interests change during the course of that? And how much was the bike kind of incidental? And I'm also thinking, though, that even bikes, and riding bikes, they do have elements that are physical, mental, and even spiritual. And did that come out in conversations? I guess I'm just wondering a bit more about the duration of the whole project.
Sorry. My kids were about 8 years old, which is pretty young to be making them build a bike and do a bunch of stuff and everything. So I think definitely my idea of how the project would go before I knew my kids changed. I had a lot of help from my partner Jason, who knows a lot about bikes too. And we found that the kids came and he would set up his camera on a tripod and they would fall in love with that camera. Because it's like, it's not a phone, right? So kids were like, a real camera, that's pretty cool. So we let them take pictures of themselves. They loved that. They loved the bike. They loved when we took out the parts and started putting it together. But I did find that on days when I had a mixed group of girls and boys, the boys would put the bike together and the girls would come and do beading with me, or they would come and do whatever I was doing a little bit more. But when the boys weren't there were a few days when no boys showed up for some reason. And when the boys weren't there, those girls were on that bike. They were like, I'm pumping this tire and I'm doing this. So that was an interesting thing to see, that dynamic. And then one day I brought my sewing machine, because the project to me was really about teaching them things that I know, whatever I know. So I brought my sewing machine to sew some panels for on the bike. And I didn't know how much 8-year-olds would be interested in that. They were so amazed by the sewing machine, and I had a little girl who, it was her first day there, and she said she always wanted to be a fashion designer, and she had never seen a real sewing machine before, so I showed her how to do it, and she got on my sewing machine and sewed some things and everything. And so like my classes with them were, it was after school program. So I didn't want it to feel like it was school to them, because they wouldn't come then, right? So it was like herding cats the entire time. It was like, question here, I don't know what you're talking about, blah. So I was like really lucky to have Jason with me. And there was often a lot of kids. But it was like that. It was like they learned a whole bunch, but in a really haphazard, insane way, and told me a bunch of very personal things about themselves. And so it was like a weird roller coaster of insanity and then quiet intimateness and all this sort of stuff. But I think the bike was always really present in their minds. We had the picture of the bikes he'd done before, and so it was almost like the bike was a rock star to them. So yeah.
Yeah, the bike didn't necessarily seem like the end goal. More the end goal was getting, at first it was like walking, was like, yeah, let's art up this bike, let's figure this out, do this. But by the end of it, it seemed kind of like it didn't really matter that much. The kids were really involved with cameras and toys and technology, as kids tend to be, you know. But they were also interested in getting this bike finished. Although the bike didn't necessarily seem like the end goal for them, it seemed like what was the end goal was listening, sharing their experiences, talking, taking a break from school to be involved in something that is going to have a presence elsewhere. They really liked checking out all the cameras. There was a couple of kids who I'd just give cameras to, and they'd do the documentation of the process while I was working on the bike. And they loved that. So they'd come up and ask questions about cameras and stuff like that, or ask questions about the bike itself. There is obviously a gender divide when you have people that young often like to fall into gender roles also. So getting some of the girls involved was a little bit more difficult at times, but then at other times they were like, give me that wrench, I'm gonna just start doing this. Or I need that power drill to take out these spokes, or whatever. They were really excited to work with the hides, even though the hides were insanely difficult to manage. It's just working with rawhide is never an easy thing. So it was but they're really interested in that, and so we focused a lot more on that than on other things. If the school had better facilities, I'm sure we would have been spray painting and stuff there too. But elementary schools usually don't like that too much. So yeah, there was a big change in the whole process during.
Traditional teachings are done visually. That's why a lot of our ancestors wore their art. They did buffalo hide paintings, and while they were doing this, they were teaching. And all our spiritual paraphernalia, pipes, etc., like that, everything is a teaching tool. And to use the bike in that respect had a lot of help. The staff was always there. They were interested in the traditional aspect of what was going on there. But we used, with the help of the staff, we used the tangents that the kids would go on to teach them other things, and we didn't necessarily have to